Let's talk about money. Because I wanted to expand on the foresight topic we had last night, speaking about the Vancouver Canucks and their inability to keep Tyler Toffoli. This is a big deal because Tyler Toffoli is one of the best goal scorers in the entire NHL. And to those who are saying, oh, I'd rather have all the other guys we have on our team right now, no, you wouldn't. If Tyler Toffoli's playing for Vancouver, he doesn't score as many goals as he does against Vancouver, and that means the Vancouver Canucks automatically win, at the very least, a few more games, because they're getting more goals out of Toffoli. It's not guaranteed, but I think it'd be pretty likely. If he was on this team, he'd probably score goals, and the Canadiens are not filling up the Canucks' nets with pucks over and over and over again, because Tyler Toffoli seems to be the only guy who can score for Montreal against Vancouver, aside from Jeff Petrie and Josh Anderson and Suzuki, and actually there's a lot of people over there. I'm not going to make it seem here like Tyler Toffoli being on the Canucks today would make them all of a sudden the best team in Canada. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is the Vancouver Canucks and their overall ability to manage money has been so poor, which is why they weren't able to even recircle back to this guy in the first place. Remember, Tyler Toffoli thought he would stay with Vancouver. He wanted to come back, but the Vancouver Canucks just didn't go out there and entertain his contract offer, which is why he ended up leaving. Why is that, you may ask? Well, in my opinion, it's because they didn't have the money to afford him. And there's a reason why the money to afford him wasn't there. Let's go over a lot of the history that Jim Benning has had as the Vancouver Canucks general manager into screwing this team over with its cap issues, the money issues, and just the foresight, what we have as a hockey team here and how this team is being managed. The Vancouver Canucks lost out on every single free agent they had at the 2020 NHL free agency period, except for Ashton Sautner. They brought that guy back because cool. Everything else, though, Troy Stecher, Chris Tanev, Jacob Markstrom, Tyler Toffoli, yeah, they're gone. The significant ones are out. Now, that's not to disrespect Ashton Sautner. I'm pretty sure he's a cool guy. Not to disrespect Jake Virtanen either, because he was an RFA, which means he didn't have the same ability to negotiate with other teams like Tanev, Markstrom, and Toffoli did. However, the mere fact that Jake Virtanen is even still here is in itself a contention point. Because Jake Virtanen was an RFA with registered arbitration status, he was in the ballpark if the Vancouver Canucks wanted to trade him to either be traded or non-qualified. The Vancouver Canucks went out there and they re-signed him to a contract. It took 2 weeks to do it, but they did it. And the way things unfolded, if you take a look at the timeline of things, the Vancouver Canucks ended up losing out on Toffoli, Markstrom, Tanev, and all those guys within the first 3 days of free agency. During those few days, the Vancouver Canucks signed Braden Holtby, they acquired Nate Schmidt, and then they signed Jake Virtanen a few weeks after. The way things are assembled, it honestly seems like to me, Jake Virtanen was the last of their priorities over here. And in my opinion, the way that the Vancouver Canucks let Tyler Toffoli walk, where they weren't entertaining his offers, and also the way they let Troy Stecher leave, where they gave him an ultimatum. They said, okay, bud, we're going to sign you either now or never. Make your choice today, before he had the chance to actually consider the Detroit offer. Because of the way the Vancouver Canucks cap was laid out, I believe they were forced into making some of these rash decisions, because for Troy Stecher, Tyler Toffoli, the guys that are honestly on pretty cheap contracts, that a lot of the fan base was saying, okay, well, if we sign them to that contract, I think it'd be pretty good. These are the kinds of guys that we weren't able to re-sign because of these other moves. Firstly, Braden Holtby, $4-point-something million goaltender for 2 years. I get that he's expansion draft material. I get that the Vancouver Canucks wanted to have a system where they had a 1A, 1B tandem going on in a shortened season where you only play the toughest of the tough. The Canadian teams, man, they're all good. But Thatcher Demko was supposed to be the guy into the long-term future, right? That's kind of what we saw against Vegas. We saw Thatcher Demko completely steal the show. We saw earlier in the year Thatcher Demko stealing the show. And the fact that the Vancouver Canucks went out there and they acquired a legit guy who you could debate is a starter to split the load with a Thatcher Demko, who is supposed to be the starter into the long term. Why would it not be possible to just go out there and acquire some of the other goaltenders who were a lot cheaper? Holtby's contract is 4.3 AAV with the Canucks. Cam Talbot signed a contract that's worth 3.6. Thomas Greiss and the Red Wings signed a 3.6 contract as well. Anton Hudobin, who just made the Stanley Cup Finals, was coming off of a contract that was 3 years long at $10 million total, making his AAV 3.3. Henrik Lundqvist, I know that's a difficult one to swallow. Obviously, different circumstances apply here with Lundqvist, but he signed a $1.5 million contract. You have other goalies around the league who got swapped around and picked off that are a lot cheaper than what Braden Holtby is. And even though Braden Holtby's not the problem, he's one part of the Vancouver Canucks that I think is, in a weird way, somewhat overpaid. Let's go a year before. Tyler Myers, $6 million AAV in the 2019 free agency period. Look at the other defenders that were available in this year. Jake Gardner's contract is just over $4 million AAV. Andre Stecher was a guy who went to the Stanley Cup Finals. He signed a one-year, $1.5 million contract. You had Derek Englund, a one-year, $700,000 deal. Nathan Beaulieu signed a $1.1 million deal. Luke Shen, that's a difficult one because we knew that Luke Shen specifically chose Tampa because he wanted to win a cup. He did, so very big congrats to you, Luke Shen. But my point is, this Vancouver Canucks team just went out there and just spent all the money they had on whoever was out there in the market at a high price. You know what they did this time around? They traded for a guy, Nate Schmidt, who was making a big amount of money, and I get that Nate Schmidt is a valuable player, but what they did at the end of this year's offseason was they waited and they signed whoever was available for a cheap contract. I get that Travis Hamonic being out contributes to the Vancouver Canucks' bad play thus far, and it certainly does, but that's the kind of transaction that I believe is honestly kind of a win, where you wait it out, you see who's still available, and the guys who were probably asking for a little bit of a higher price tag earlier in the offseason, all of a sudden they're desperate to get onto a team. Boom, you sign them because they're right there, they're cheap, and they come onto your team and they provide positive impacts. Corey Perry is an example of this on the Habs. Sure, the Habs actually had the benefit of having a guy like Corey Perry want to play for their team, but the point remains, if you wait until the end of free agency, there are usually going to be players who are available that you can snag up for the cheap, and the Vancouver Canucks did that with Hamonic. Why did they have to go out there and sign Tyler Myers to a contract that was that big? The fact that year over year it's just spending, and you go out there, you refuse to buy out Brandon Sutter, you refuse to go without qualifying Virtanen, like... The narrative that a lot of people have been throwing around is, oh, the team chose Virtanen over Toffoli. Jake Virtanen wasn't even playing last night, bro. This is like the umpteenth time we've given Jake Virtanen a chance. He's 24, 25 years old now. He's not 18 anymore. This is a guy who was legitimately supposed to be entering his prime, and we're still trying to figure it out with him. And the fact that this team went out there when faced with a scenario where they pretty much needed to choose him or Toffoli before making all the other moves, and they went with the way things went, it does feel very frustrating. I can even commend them for going out there and trying to get Tyson Barrie for the dollar amount that he was asking for, because apparently he asked for a pretty cheap contract. He accepted a cheaper one with Edmonton because Connor McDavid is there, but the Vancouver Canucks going out there and putting all their focus on Tyson Barrie and Oliver Ekman-Larsson and ignoring all the guys they had in their organization beforehand, while also not doing anything to rid the contracts of Sutter, Beagle, Roussel, all these big names taking up big money in the bottom six. Yeah, that's kind of how things went, and that's why players like Stecher went to Detroit for a contract that was significantly cheaper than what he had in Vancouver last year. The Canucks went out there and they were saying the entire time, we want to sign Stecher to a contract that is similar to what he had before. He signed a much cheaper deal with Detroit because the way Vancouver handled those negotiations, just unacceptable in my opinion. And it's the tail end of a domino effect that concludes after so much money is being spent everywhere else that you're just kind of locked up now, And this is the problem with foresight, because the Vancouver Canucks shouldn't even be in this kind of position anyway. They're not a cup contending team. They're not a team that should go out there and make big moves for pending free agents to help them over the hump to win a cup by trading away prospects and picks for that. No, the Tyler Toffoli trade at the beginning, Tyler Madden, a second-round pick, and Tim Schaller for Tyler Toffoli, that's the kind of trade a cup-contending team makes to get over the hump. It's not usually a trade made by bubble teams like the Vancouver Canucks were at that time. And they made even more issues for themselves when they weren't able to bring back this guy. Because now in hindsight, you just essentially lost Tyler Madden and a second-round pick for nothing. Tyler Toffoli had one good game in the postseason. It was Game 2 against Vegas where he came back and he scored like 2 goals or whatever. That was it. Was Tyler Madden worth that? Was Judd Brackett and his scouting, third-round services worth that? I don't know. Which is why I'm finally on this train where I'm just like, even though I've been defending Jim Benning and the way he has assembled this team over the past 6 years, the way this team has been spending their money, in my opinion, has never been responsible. The only contracts that I think people actually liked were the contracts for the players people actually liked. The bridge deals for Besser and Horvat, these were okay contracts. Notice I haven't mentioned once JT Miller because he's on a pretty good contract too for the player he can be. It's just everybody else, man. The bottom six of this team. Tyler Myers being signed to $6 million despite being a mid-tier third-pair defenseman. If you just waited for any other options that could have been available at that free agency period, you wouldn't have this problem. Braden Holtby, first instinct, signed this guy, big $4.3 million contract. There you go. Patience is a virtue, you know? And I think being able to go out there and scan the market for other options would have probably been really beneficial. You know, like Louis Domingue was out there. He's a free agent. He may not be Braden Holtby, but I think he could probably play somewhat at the NHL level. And even if it's not Domingue, look at all the trades made with all these other teams. Aaron Dell, Devin Dubnyk, Jack Campbell, they're goalies on the market. And these guys are honestly fairly okay at playing at the NHL. The bottom line is there are other options, and it's just kind of boiled over to the point where so many of the first options of spending so much money have been exploited that now this team is where it is. And I'm finally willing to talk about it, you know? So yeah, talk to me in the comments what you think. I hope you enjoyed this Visual 99. And bye.